work. We should always evaluate what it is we're doing. Next slide, please. And this work must be part of a broader effort, a broader strategy to mobilise men and mobilise communities. We need to create opportunities for men to mobilise their communities through events, through networks, through campaigns. We should organise and foster grassroots men's networks and groups. We should build coalitions with civil society and with government. And we should build capacity to implement this work towards non-violence, through training, through program planning, through organisational development. And I'm sure you're saying, yes, that's nice, but where's the money? And I won't address that today. Next slide, please. So to conclude, men have a vital role to play in helping to end violence against women. But if we are to create cultures among men of non-violence and gender equality, we must make much more systematic efforts to engage men and change men. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Michael, por esta presentación en donde nos está mostrando precisamente una perspectiva amplia de las implicaciones que tiene este fenómeno y también los desafíos de alguna manera y cuáles son las posibles rutas para desarticular esta forma de ejercicio y de práctica social. A continuación tenemos la participación de María Eriksson. Es un honor tenerla entre nosotros también. Ella es socióloga e investigadora en el Departamento de Estudios de Género de la Universidad de Gotemburgo, en Suecia. Ella ha sido coordinadora del Consejo Nórdico de Ministros del Programa de Género y Violencia. Actualmente desarrolla un proyecto sobre violencia ejercida por padres después del divorcio. Ha sido también coordinadora del proyecto de violación de derechos humanos en los países nórdicos. Tiene una serie amplia de publicaciones, entre ellas Violencia de Varones, Violencia ejercida y estrategias de política de género en Suecia, entre otras muchas. Le damos la más cordial bienvenida y tienes la palabra.
Thank you so much for that nice presentation. I also want to start by saying a very big thank you to the organizers and particularly to Juan Carlos for inviting me here. I'm really honored and it's a pleasure to share some thoughts with you today on how to dislocate men's violence. What I'm going to do in this contribution is two things. I want to bring forward the legacy from gender research in understanding men's violence to women in particular, but also men's violence more broadly. But I also want to argue that we need to develop much more complex gender perspectives if we are to be able to combat and avoid unintended consequences of our efforts to combat men's violence in diverse settings, because of history, culture, and different patterns of inequality and injustice. And I say this speaking from a very particular location in time and space. Because on the one hand, I live and work in a part of the Western world, which in many ways is dominating on a global level. On the other hand, Sweden can be perceived as a periphery within that dominating part of the world. This country of 9 million people, located on the northern fringe of Europe, there we speak a language that it's only some of our even smaller Nordic neighbors that understand it. So as you can understand, Swedish is a very small academic language. And this is true perhaps particularly in the research on gender and violence. When we look at current knowledge on gender and violence and men's violence, this marginal position is even more evident. 2 recent large-scale surveys of research and policy publications on men's violence in 14 European countries that was commissioned or funded by the European Commission, they show that although there is a considerable amount of Nordic research on men generally, there has not been a great deal of research on the specific issue of violence, relatively speaking. As a contrast, we can note that there has been produced far more in, for example, the United Kingdom and Germany. And this is specifically true for the United Kingdom. In the Nordic countries, most of the research on men has been on work in the home and in the labor market, or on issues of men's well-being. And I also want to add that recent large-scale prevalence surveys of men's violence to women carried out in, for example, Finland and Sweden, they show that men's violence to women is a considerable problem also in these countries. For example, in the Swedish study, 28% of women reported physical violence from an ex-husband or partner, live-in partner. So the relative gap in Nordic research and policy on men's violence compared to, for example, the United Kingdom must be the result of other factors than the lack of a social problem. So the picture of Sweden and the Nordic countries more broadly as an academic periphery becomes even clearer if we look at pioneering work and key contributions to the understanding of men's violence as violence by men rather than violence by citizens, workers, or violence in any other capacity. And here the importance of feminist and pro-feminist activists and researchers in the English-speaking part of the world cannot be stressed enough. And I want to bring forward some of the contributions underpinning the perspective that Dr. Michael Flood just presented to you. So I want to bring out contribution both concerning the awareness-raising efforts that made this into a topic for study at all, and the theorizing of men's violence. And I can't go into details because of time here, so I will just mention some early key contributions to give you an idea of what I'm thinking about. Let's see, where are we? This is far ahead. You should go back to the first one. So now the next slide, please. Thank you. The themes I want to make a brief comment upon are, first of all, the recognition and theorizing of the pervasiveness